Here we go again. It's time for Season 2 of the NASCAR Thunder 2004 Career Mode. Hopefully it was worth the wait. To quickly recap last season, we started off horrible because we were a brand new team. Got some momentum rolling in the summer because I wasn't wrecking out of races, so all the money I earned went right back into the equipment. I then picked up 2 wins in the Brickyard 400 at Indianapolis and also in the Sirius at the Glen at Watkins Glen. Got into a stupid, almost season-long rivalry with Jeff Gordon and finished 24th in the point standings. Meanwhile, Dale Earnhardt Jr. destroyed the entire field on the way to his first championship. And so, we begin Season 2 with a few $1 million in the bank and a lofty goal of a top 10 points finish. I did win some poles last season, which is why I'm in the Bud Shootout, and with a car rating of 56, we headed back to Daytona for Speed Weeks 2004. The Bud Shootout was stupid. It was a 17-lap race, and I could only go 5 laps on fuel. Thus, it was a 3-stopper. Meanwhile, everybody else could make it on only 2 stops with a little bit of fuel saving, which I could not manage because I have terrible fuel economy. It's not really like that extra pit stop mattered too much since I was only like 16th fastest on pace anyway, so I was going to finish like close to last. Coming down pit road for a 3rd time dropped me to last position, and I got off pit road barely ahead of race leader Michael Waltrip. I held him off until Michael ran out of gas, but by the way, he still won the race. And fortunately, by staying on the lead lap, I was able to run the last lap of the race and pass Tony Stewart, who blew up. This allowed me to finish in 20th spot instead of absolutely dead last. Then it was on to 500 week, where I qualified pretty decently, taking the 22nd spot. And in my 125, I was just fast enough on the start to go from an 11th place starting position up to 8th position, and then I started just playing the blocking game from there against the entire pack since there was like no chance of me going forward. Ryan Newman blew up, and I held off Kurt Busch and Kevin Harvick to finish in 8th position, which means I'll roll off 16th for the Daytona 500, which is, by the way, the same spot that I started in last season. In the Great American Race, I had a few goals. First of which was to get down to the bottom line. I completed that one into turn 1. My second goal was to find a drafting partner. Now that one didn't go quite as well. After trying out a few different tandems and falling back to 22nd in the process, I found that just like Talladega in the fall, me and Ryan Newman work very well together. That draft fell apart on lap 15 when he rocketed away with Joe Nemechek, and from that point, I hooked up with Ricky Craven and rode around until my first pit stop. The Jack man instantly screwed up and gave me a 21+ second stop. I cycled out in 33rd and spent my entire second stint drafting with Michael Waltrip, who went from winning the Bud Shootout to running 32nd in the Daytona 500. I went down pit road for my final stop on lap 34, took right side tires only, and had a run-in with Jeremy Mayfield because he tried running me off the track. Ryan Newman lost another engine, and I cycled out in the 25th position. I got around Kyle Petty and Jack Sprague and brought it home in 23rd spot in the Daytona 500. Sterling Marlin, by the way, won the 500, which is his 3rd in this timeline. Unrelated, I really like the help button sound effect. Surprisingly, I did not fire the Jackman after the Daytona 500. Then we were off to Rockingham for the first downforce race of the year and also first tire wear race of the year. I put together a laughable 41st place qualifying run and then had a very interesting first stint. I got back into my rivalry with Joe Nemechek and then started a new one with Christian Fittipaldi. I had an awesome moment on lap 23. Joe Nemechek tried to slam me on the exit of turn 2, going against the laws of physics in doing so, and he barely tapped my right rear and the entire bumper exploded. Just a lap later, a part of the bumper fell off, which brought out the caution flag. Later on, I was back to trading paint with Nemechek. There's just something about Hendrick cars. You know, I swear, they got magnets in them. I ran pretty solidly in the latter half of the race and finished in 28th. Then we were back in Vegas, and I really took advantage of the opening laps. In fact, I was running as high as 17th at the end of lap number 2 and spent the entire race bleeding track position. My biggest takeaway from running crap wagons for so long in this series is that it's not about outrunning people. It's about losing spots as slowly as possible. After a whole lot of defense and some riding around, I brought it home in 29th position. Next up was Atlanta, and just like last season, I was able to hang on to the share draft DRS trains and run pretty decently. Not too much happened in this race, until the final few laps at least. On lap 77, I got tight off turn 4 trying to pass the lap car of Christian Fittipaldi, and I bounced off the wall and got into Elliott Sadler. Now this set off just a chain reaction of events where he got into the wall and got rammed by Greg Biffle. Sadler's fuel cell exploded, he caught on fire, and then mysteriously teleported. The race ended under caution, with Tony Stewart taking the win, while I finished in 21st.
Could have been better.
Next up was Darlington, which is again a track I love, but one that my equipment does not. The highlight of the weekend was putting it on pole above Jeff Gordon of all people, but you know, I just don't have the tire wear needed to actually go up there and win at this track. I led the field until lap 19, when the tires died and I ran out of talent all at the same time. I tried to force DJ to lift. When he didn't, I almost saved it and then slammed right into the wall in front of Jeff Gordon, spun it around, and I somehow didn't wreck out, but Jeff Gordon's car was terminally damaged. I drove back up to third before the tires died again, and then Ricky Rudd brought out a debris caution, and I saw that as an opportunity to put on tires since my car eats them for breakfast. And you know, sure, I restarted in 41st, but I saw a whole lot more potential in the double stop stint instead of trying to slide around on old tires and wreck it again. And believe me, I flew through the field, getting all the way up to 5th before the next pit cycle. My only regret from this strategy is that I think I came down for my second stop just a little too early. I should have tried to take advantage of my tires a little bit more, but I came down pit road when the leaders did. It was reactionary and not exactly very well thought out. In the closing laps, I was battling with Jimmy Johnson, Ricky Rudd, and Mark Martin for the 7th position, and Ricky got by me, but I held up everybody else to take an 8th place finish.
The 121 car has the beginnings of a rivalry with the 24 car.
You think? Next up was Bristol, which I normally dread, but this time I had a very stupid idea. We usually get a guaranteed mystery caution at this track because someone, comes off pit road in a dissatisfactory manner, so I decided to make that caution a part of my race strategy. Because I don't even have the fuel economy to make this race on 2 stops, I spun myself out on lap 10 in such a manner that the game took control of my car just milliseconds before I hit the wall, leaving me with no damage and the ability to go off strategy and fill the car up with gas. Using that additional fuel, I ran long and caught a Ward Burton mystery pit road caution. Now this yellow trapped a bunch of cars a lap or 2 behind me, giving me a lot of track position that I did not deserve. In fact, I was running an 18th spot on the lead lap. So, I decided, rinse and repeat. I'll try the same exact thing on the second pit cycle. I wrecked myself on lap 61, came to pit road, and ran the stint long. This time, though, we shockingly did not get a caution for someone doing absolutely nothing. It was like the game caught on to what I was trying to do, so I had to bring out the caution myself. Suddenly, Jeff Gordon was very useful. Also, shout out to Kevin Harvick, who pulled off a flip at Bristol. I mean, it felt like overkill from him, but I appreciate the style. After that caution, there was 4 cars on the lead lap, and I was one of them. Casey Mears and Jerry Nadeau both had to pit, and I ended up being in 2nd behind Tony Stewart. And in like 15 laps, smoke put half a track on me, but I really didn't care about that. I closed out a very dumb 2nd place finish and earned $515,000. Next up was Texas, which is easily my best track on the schedule, and I had one goal coming into this race: legitimize my team's performance. I want to go up there at Texas and try to win legit, and I sat on the pole by 0.3 of a second. Dale Jr. led the first 2 laps, but I quickly dealt with him and never looked back. By the end of the race, I was lapping top 5 running cars. I got by Dale Jr. on the final lap, leaving just myself, Jeff Gordon, and Ryan Newman on the lead lap, and I cruised the thing home to a dominant win. I led a nice 69 laps in the race and earned a crap ton of money, which instantly went into car upgrades. Next up, Talladega, where I qualified in 22nd again. I have a habit of qualifying right around there on super speedways, but I ran much better in the race though, racing my way up to 14th spot and avoiding Kyle Petty, who almost wrecked by himself. Then the AIs did their classic check-up thing in the turn 3. I knew it was going to happen, but it still caught me off guard, and I slammed the outside wall with Ricky Craven. After completing my first pit stop, we immediately had a caution. The cause of the caution? Another classic AI screw-up. Jeff Gordon drifted down the track just enough into turn 1 to clip Kevin Grubb and send him into a vertical spin flip. I didn't pit, and then I cycled out as the leader. I dropped back a little bit to draft with Bobby Labonte, and then Kevin Grubb brought out a caution for debris. Later on, Casey Mears ran out of gas on the backstretch. His teammate Sterling Marlin absolutely destroyed him at full speed, bringing out another caution. When we went back under green, I was in 23rd spot, but pretty much everyone else pitted, which cycled me back to the lead. I spent a portion of this stint drafting with Jeff Gordon, which I feel formally ended our rivalry, at least for now, and I almost got squeezed into the wall during another AI checkup into turn 3, but barely got by this time. I realized at this point that I borked the strategy big time. I thought that the Mears Marlin run-in would cause a series of debris cautions that would pretty much end the race. Well, I was wrong, and I had to come down pit road on lap 44 for fuel only. There were a few drivers who ran out of gas on the final lap, creating some interesting scenarios, like when Mark Martin slammed right into his teammate Jeff Burton, and then I got by Jeff Gordon and Michael Waltrip, who ran out on the final lap as well. But Jimmy Johnson, and ironically, Sterling Marlin, made it to the finish without having to come back down pit road, and I took home a 3rd place finish. Not bad, but still not too good considering I lost the race to a dumb strategy decision. Next up was Martinsville, my absolute least favorite track in this game. Now don't get me wrong, I love the real Martinsville, okay? Just not this one. I qualified in 24th on my first lap, spun out on my second, and finished my run backwards. I just so much didn't care in this race.
Keep hitting those marks.
Most importantly, Christian Fittipaldi brought out the caution by doing absolutely nothing. And I held off Rusty in the final 15 laps, closed out a 20th place finish, barely satisfying my current sponsor contracts in doing so. At this point, I'm outrunning Jeff Gordon in the point standings, which is an interesting feeling. Then we were off to Fontana, another powerhouse track. And other than Casey Mears being stupid on the opening lap, the race actually went pretty well. I got up to 19th, and then my forward advance just kind of stalled. With Fontana being wide and big, it gave me the opportunity to have a quiet race. And when nothing happens in a race, typically I save money. Over the course of the race, I very slowly drifted backwards, became friends with Joe Nemechek. The Jackman fell on himself again. I LePage Chase Montgomery, chopped Jeff Green, and then finished in 28th. Then we were off to Richmond, where I put the thing on the pole. Because I'm driving the world's first next-gen car, I shift in every single corner here, which does make fuel mileage a little iffy. Jeff Gordon stole the first lap lead off me, so I ran him up the track and let Dale Jarrett take the lead. I spent the first 20 laps falling back to 5th until I got tight off turn 4 and bounced off the wall into Jeff Gordon. I almost spun out, cutting off Elliott Sadler after my first pit stop, and I spent the final stint defending like my life depended on it because I just wanted a top 15 finish. By holding off McMurray, Elliott Sadler, Kenseth, Bill Elliott, and Bobby Labonte in a hard-fought battle in the final few laps, I was able to close out that top 15. Next up is one of my personal favorite races, the Winston. Anytime you put up $1 million to win, you're gonna see something crazy, especially out of people like me who really need that money. So I started the Winston from 20th position and drove all the way up to 5th before coming down pit road for the mandatory 4-tire pit stop in segment 1. While I was on pit road, Dale Jarrett lost an engine, but then, in a moment of pure genius, the entire field tried to pit while Dale Jarrett was trying to make his way back to pit road, destroying like 5 cars in the process. Meanwhile, here I come, I can't see and don't know how many cars have wrecked, so I slam right into Sterling Marlin, which for some reason upset him. Just a little bit of advice, instead of getting upset about being rammed after wrecking, try not to wreck. Anyways, I survived, and this crash made me look like a genius. I was the only one who had already made the mandatory pit stop, so when we went back to green, everyone ducked to pit road, which caught me off guard just a little bit, and I pulled a full Tokyo drift, but I was fine. I cycled to the lead and took home a very easy segment 1 win. That bit of luck also made segment 2 pretty easy since I started as the leader, and all I had to do was just keep everyone behind me for 7 laps and close it out for some more cash. But then we have segment 3, you know, the one with an inversion. In this case, the top 10 was inverted, so with 5 laps to go, I'm restarting in 10th, and defending champ Dale Earnhardt Jr. is now the leader. $1 million is plenty big enough carrot to get me to do some aggressive things. On the restart, I pretty much ran Bobby Labonte off the track because I needed the bottom, and I just rocketed straight through the field. I got into Matt Kenseth and Jeff Gordon, and before you know it, I was back into the top 5. With 3 laps to go, I got by Tony Stewart and decided, screw it. I'm getting by Kurt Busch on the top because I just do not feel like putting up with blocking down the backstretch, so I surprised him by jumping up to the outside off turn 2. And this actually caught Dale Jr. off guard, so he left the bottom open, and I just charged turn 3, made a little bit of contact, and then tried to scoot away as fast as possible. And in the last 2 laps, I put about a second on the field. And coming off turn 4, I picked up my first victory in the Winston. It may have also been a burnout in front of Jeff Gordon's pit stall. $1.09 million earned from that one after scoring the victory in all 3 segments. A major monetary boost for the whole season. And next up was more Charlotte. This time, the Coca-Cola 600. I put the thing on the pole and picked up right where I left off in the Winston. The first stint went pretty smoothly. I had a little over a 9-second gap before coming down pit road for my first stop, and from there it was just rinse and repeat. I had to keep control of the race and pray for no cautions. Rusty Wallace, by the way, had a mechanical failure early in the race, but came back out on the racetrack multiple laps down and was like 40 miles an hour off the pace. I was pretty lucky not to wreck into him on multiple occasions, but some of that was just my own unwillingness to lift. He at least created a little bit of drama by being a moving chicane because I spent the entire race smoking the field. Like it wasn't even close. In the final few laps, I was lapping top 10 cars and had a well over 22-second advantage above Tony Stewart. I cruised the thing home and picked up yet another big money win. The paycheck might not have been as big as the Winston, but I think that this race and the one at Texas really prove our team's pace. That top 10 points finish is starting to look pretty doable. Then we were back at Dover. I rolled off in 23rd spot and made some pretty good moves off the start of the race to get some early track position. But on only lap 2, I chopped down on McMurray and my car vertically hopped, and I saved it thanks to Ricky Rudd and the outside wall. But behind me, total chaos. Ward Burton and Robbie Gordon got clobbered and started flipping all over the backstretch, putting us under caution. I was able to make up spots on the restart very, very quickly. Ward Burton caused a debris caution. I actually made my way all the way up to 16th before my first pit stop, so the car had a lot more pace in it than I had expected. Things got real interesting on lap 51. Jack Sprague brought out a debris caution while I was running in 17th. Well, there was only 24 cars on the lead lap, so I saw the perfect opportunity to put tires on. With fresh rubber, I flew through the field on the restart and actually made my way all the way up to 5th, and I fell back once I lost my tire advantage towards the end of the race, but I still closed out a 13th place finish. I want to thank Jack Sprague for that debris caution. Literally couldn't have done it without you. Next up was Pocono, and I have the same problem here as I have at Darlington. I could easily win at this racetrack, as long as my tires weren't made of lukewarm cream cheese. I won the pole again and held on to the lead for the first 6 laps until something very stupid happened. Ashton Lewis blew up in the tunnel turn and got turned around by David Green. I decided, well, it's only lap 6, I probably shouldn't pit, but everybody else pitted. And because they have better fuel mileage than me, they can make it on one stop from this point. So now, I've got to run around on old tires, and I still need to make one more pit stop than everybody else. I played the defense game to the best of my ability on old tires, and I really couldn't put up a good fight, and I dropped back to 13th before I made my first pit stop. At this point, I'm furious and decided, you know what, I'm not going a lap down. So I LePaged Tony Stewart to make sure that I got off pit road in front of him, and then quickly drove away as fast as I possibly could, since he was quite offended. I rode out the rest of that stint and waited until I was good to go on one more stop before I obviously spun out by accident, to get a caution so I could stay on the lead lap. And hey, if everyone's going to run their fuel lines through the roll cage to get that kind of fuel mileage, I think I have the right to determine when at least one caution's gonna fall. My team actually runs a Ford Cosworth engine that you'd find in CART. It only gets like 1.6 miles to the gallon. After my second stop, I cycled out in 40th, but I was on the lead lap, which meant all I had to do was just try to pass as many cars as I possibly could. I drove all the way back up to 14th before my tires melted, and I ran out of laps. The next race was Michigan, which again is terrible for the Ford Cosworth engine package because I can only run about 20 laps Everybody else can work it out to the end of lap 24. They can make it on one pit stop, and I have to make two. That's just guaranteed. I sat on the pole for this race somehow, and then very quickly fell back to 15th. I ran out of talent on exactly lap number 7, drifted for approximately 3 miles, and then brought out the caution. I managed to pop the car into neutral on the restart, which was cool, and raced up to 33rd before we had a legendary back marker moment. I tried to go 3 wide under Kyle Petty and Chase Montgomery. Thought I could do it kind of quickly because they're very slow. Turns out I couldn't. I pushed up into Kyle. He was very offended, turned right into me to try to wreck me, failed, and then I spun down into Chase Montgomery and turned him around as well. Just like that, we're under caution again. I raced my way up to 19th before pit stops began and cycled out as the leader for a little bit because I ran long. At the end of my stint, I decided to just spin myself so that I didn't have to worry about fuel or tires and we could just get to the finish. It seemed to me safer to wreck like that instead of wrecking super hard trying to defend later on old tires. I drove back up to 27th before Chase Montgomery, who mind you is a lap behind me, decided to start basically intimidating me. I wasn't putting up with it for very long. I chopped down on him on the backstretch and he proceeded to violently swat flies. While he was trying to save it, Brett Bodine rammed him and Montgomery's fuel cell exploded, DNFing him and leaving the race to end under caution. I brought it home in 27th. After a very stupid 2-race stretch at Pocono and Michigan, I felt it was time for me to redeem myself at Sonoma. I put it on pole again and drove away from the field on the first lap, but Kyle Petty brought out the caution after ramming Rusty Wallace and spinning himself out. On lap 6, I self-spun, because of course, and I raced back to the line in second. After that one, I decided to come down pit road and restart in dead last, but I had the car underneath me to actually drive back through the field. I used my car up quite a bit though, trying to do that, and while battling with Kenseth for 4th, my hood flew off, which brought out another caution. Then I headed back down pit road to repair the damage, cycled out in last, self-spun again, and this time I decided not to pit under caution, and because of that, I cycled out as the leader. You know, skill issues usually aren't that beneficial, but this one certainly was. Surprisingly, I ran the last 8 laps without screwing it, and I picked up the win by over 13 seconds above Mark Martin. Then it was time to go back to Daytona for the Pepsi 400. For the first time ever, we had a fast superspeedway car. I qualified in 9th and genuinely had the pace to stay up there. For the first stint, I was playing the share draft game mainly with Elliott Sadler. I hooked up with him and tried to chase down the top 3, who had already broken away from the pack. We actually chased down and passed Kevin Harvick, leaving just Jeff Gordon and Dale Earnhardt Jr. up in front of us. We caught him right as the pit window opened, and I ducked down pit road on lap 16 for my first of 2 stops. I cycled out to the lead after my first stop, and when the pack caught up to me, I got in line behind Dale Jarrett, another Robert Yates car, and tried to share draft away from everyone again. After completing my final stop, I cycled back into the lead and just played the defense game all the way to the finish. I held off fellow Ford drivers Ricky Rudd and Dale Jarrett to take the win in the Pepsi 400 at Daytona. You know, imagine a real driver for just a moment in their second season, already having wins at Indianapolis, Charlotte, and Daytona. Next up was Chicagoland, which marks the halfway point of the season, and we all remember how bad this race went for me last season, so the goal here is to finish the race with all 4 tires still on the car. I qualified in 12th and was just decent. I very slowly drifted backwards throughout the whole race, but fortunately my sponsors only want top 20s right now, which was very doable. I closed out a 17th place finish, but there was some very serious death on the final lap that had nothing to do with me. Dale Jarrett somehow exploded, Ryan Newman ended up flaming on his side, and I still have no idea what happened. So before we went to New Hampshire, I had some sponsorship contracts to attend to. I re-signed with NASCAR.com as my primary and associate. I kept Coca-Cola as my secondary and picked up NBC Sports and Goodyear as brand new partners. And while I've got some familiar sponsors back on the car, their expectations are way higher. I've got to qualify in the top 10, finish in the top 5, and finish ahead of Rusty Wallace for some reason to complete all of my sponsor objectives on any given weekend. I won the pole at New Hampshire thanks to downshifting. The only problem is I can't downshift as often as I need to in the race because I still have horrible fuel economy. So I maintained the lead for a decent portion of the first stint before I dropped back to 9th. As the run wore on, the rear tire changer screwed up on the first stop, and then I came back down pit road on lap 50. Take a look at who screwed up again. 2 horrible stops, all because the same guy. I brought it home in 21st position, which really disappointed my sponsors with the new contracts, and I immediately fired that tire changer on the spot to make sure that my team doesn't fumble a race that badly ever again. I mean, when you work for HJ Ball Sports, you've got to take your job seriously. Then we went to Pocono again, where I sat on the pole again. I kept the lead off turn 1 and led the first 13 laps before the tires died. I did make it really hard though for Tony Stewart and Jeff Gordon to pass me, even going 3 wide into turn 3, but I just didn't have the grip to make it happen. I got Jeff back to major rival status in trying that too. The second stint was a repeat of the first, got the lead back, fell off a cliff late, and the final stint was much of the same. I tried pretty hard to keep Jeff Gordon behind me, getting him back to a minus 100 rival status, but I just couldn't do anything with him late in these runs. I brought it home in 6th spot, but Jeff Gordon took home the win, to which I must say, GG. Then we headed back to Indianapolis for the Brickyard 400, which put a very big smile on my face. I showed up to the track on a mission, and that was to smoke the field like we did at Texas and Charlotte. I put it on pole by 3/4 of a second above Ryan Newman. Newman got a great start, and I chased him down into turn 2, trying to take the lead back off him. I got it for just a split second, but I crossed over the inside curbing, which really upset the car. I chased it up the hill, got into the wall, and set off the big one. Dale Jarrett flipped, Dale Earnhardt Jr. DNF'd, Tony Stewart, Matt Kenseth, Kurt Busch, and myself all got major damage, and I still have no idea how I didn't wreck out in this. I was so determined to win a second Brickyard 400 that I didn't even pit under caution. Believe it or not, the car was actually still kinda good. It was really loose, but it was still pretty fast. I drove it back up to 2nd before I caused a debris caution, and this time I went down pit road to fix the car, and fortunately, everybody joined me. I restarted in 10th, and now my car was flying. In 1 lap, I made it back up to 5th before Dale Jarrett dropped his hood on the track, and on the restart, I just went by everyone, gave an accidental bump and run to Kevin Harvick, and took the lead back. This is where my domination kicked in. Then after completing my final stop, I realized that some drivers had short-pitted, and that I needed to cut them off to retain the lead. I LePaged Mark Martin, and then quickly scooted away. I cycled back into the top spot, and held on to it, taking my 2nd career Brickyard 400 victory by 7.5 seconds above Tony Stewart. Because of my new sponsor contracts, I earned $1.55 million from this win. Now that is big money racing. And for the first time in my career, I'm now in the top 10 in point standings. Next up was Watkins Glen. Considering that I haven't had a non-stupid road course race in this playthrough so far, I was really hoping not to wreck by myself this time. I sat on the pole again, fell back to 3rd in turn 1, and got back to the lead with a totally legal move on Mark Martin. From that point, I just set sail and tried to make my gap above 2nd place as large as I possibly could. And you know, I had some interesting lap car moments in the final stint, little run-ins with Matt Kenseth and Chase Montgomery, but I got into a big one with Kurt Busch. He absolutely would not get out of the way, and we made contact coming into the chicane, which sent me out into the gravel trap. Granted, I got out of it, but I decided that it's on now. I haven't forgot about Atlanta last fall, so I went and roughed him up through the S's and finally put him a lap down. It's almost like I forgot I was racing for a win. But you know, at the end of that lap, I still won. I did a little bit of a burnout in front of Kurt Busch's stall and then ran out of gas in it, so they're going to have to deal with that themselves. And by the way, I won by 20 seconds above Mark Martin and earned another $1,000,000 and some for that run. But most importantly, I never spun out. But then it was back to Michigan for some guaranteed disappointment. I sat on the pole again, but I was in 6th by the end of lap 1. The free fall was real. I was in 23rd before I made my first pit stop. As you know, I have to make 2 stops. A lot of the drivers have the ability to make it on just somehow 1 stop. So after a bunch of riding around, I finished in 30th position. It was at that moment that I decided that if it's this game's policy to screw me over at Michigan, then it's my policy to screw the game over at Bristol. So at Bristol, I qualified in 7th and employed the same strategy that got me that second place finish in the spring. I wrecked myself and Elliott Sadler on lap 12 so I could come to pit road and go off strategy. Spent the rest of the stint driving hard to stay on the lead lap and worked my way up to 25th before pit stop started. I got together with Jeff Gordon again while he was coming off pit road, and while I was sliding down the racetrack, I clipped Kenny Wallace, slamming the inside wall, and I just turned back right so I would get a caution, and had another opportunity to hit pit road. By that point, there was only 8 cars on the lead lap, me being one of them. I caused another strategy caution on lap 64 and brought it back to pit road. I ran the majority of that stint in 6th position, but once everybody else who was running on my lap came down pit road, I very much accidentally spun out and trapped them all a lap down. I basically rode around for the final 20 laps and took home the least legitimate Bristol night race win in human history. It was time to head back to Darlington for the Southern 500, and I realized something before the race. I'm back 732 points from Tony Stewart with 12 races to go. And that really isn't a gap that can be made up realistically in a full season points format. But I want to contribute to some form of championship. Ford is only 11 points behind Chevrolet right now in the Manufacturers' Championship. And while sure Tony Stewart's running away with the driver's title, I'm going to try my hardest to make sure that at least his make doesn't come out on top. I qualified 11th for the Southern 500, which really surprised me. I thought I had a pole run going. And in the opening laps, Kenny Wallace remembered our run-in at Bristol and tried some stupid stuff. But after that, I started charging through the field, and I got up to 4th before the cream cheese tires really kicked in. I fell back to 6th before my first pit stop, but I cycled all the way up to 3rd by short pitting and running some good laps on fresh tires. And I pretty much held that track position all the way to my second pit stop. I got another opportunity to mess with Kenny Wallace, but then drama. The AIs wrecked right in the middle of the pit cycle. Ricky Rudd got together with Jeff Green, and they collected Matt Kenseth and Chase Montgomery. Tony Stewart trapped the entire field at least one lap down because of that caution. After what I did to win at Bristol, I deserved to get beat this way. I pitted, since I only shared the one lap down status with 7 other drivers, and I restarted in 9th. I drove hard to get through as many cars as I could, and Kenseth brought out the caution for debris while I raced back to the line like a madman to take 3rd. On the restart, I tried just a little too hard to take 2nd and fell to 4th instead, and then Mark Martin brought out the caution for debris. We ended the race behind the pace car with Tony Stewart taking the win by a lap while I finished in 4th. Next up was Richmond, where I sat on the pole by half a second and had a car just good enough to lead the race, but not good enough to gap the field. I maintained that lead during the first stint by blocking and manipulating lap traffic, and I was doing the same exact thing to great success in the second stint. That is until I screwed it. I spun myself out trying to pass a lap car of Kyle Petty. I also got together with David Green, who was very upset about the situation. Now, if I would have played the strategy better right here, I still could have won the race. But instead, I came down pit road right after I spun, thinking that I might be good to go to the end on fuel. I wasn't, but at the time I didn't know that. So I restarted in 22nd and had a completely insane 3/4 of a lap. I tried barreling through everybody, got into Jack Sprague, then Chase Montgomery blew up, stalled out the field, and here I come into turn 3, way too hot. I got into McMurray and spun myself out again. This time I decided not to pit, and I cycled out in 2nd behind McMurray, who joined my strategy. I quickly grabbed the lead and defended like crazy in an effort to keep the whole field behind me, but then we had a little bit of trouble. The fuel situation. Even with caution flag laps, I was a few laps short. So obviously I started thinking about ways to find a caution, but instead the caution found me. I caught back up to Jack Sprague inside 10 laps to go, and he chopped me coming into turn 1. I spun out for a 3rd time in this race and collected Rusty Wallace and Mark Martin, but I raced back to the caution in 7th. I know that Sprague was trying to pay me back, but little did he know that if he would have decided not to chop me, I would have ran out of gas. Instead, I only lost one more spot to Matt Kenseth on the restart, and I brought out a race-ending debris caution, in the process taking home an 8th place finish. I led 75 laps in this race, but didn't win. So I had a few plans coming into the final 10 races of the year. The first one being that I'm not going to lose another race based on my own stupidity, like I did at Richmond, but most of my plans are to position myself as well as I possibly can for the championship run next season. I fired everyone on the team and hired fresh talent coming into New Hampshire, and the reason I did that was mainly for the new builders, so I could start Season 3 with car ratings up somewhere around the mid-70s. I'm also going to treat these last 10 races as if there's a chase format. I know there isn't, but I'm putting that much emphasis on performing. Loudon went really well. We finally got the fuel economy problems addressed so I could shift every single lap. I put it on pole and just set sail. My pit crew nailed both stops, and other than some comedic run-ins with lap cars like when I kept Casey Mears from pitting, and also when I started screwing with David Green, basically nothing happened in this race, and that was fine by me. I cruised it home and picked up another dominant win. Then it was time again for Dover under the lights. I qualified in 13th and made some big moves early to get all the way up to 3rd. I realized something towards the end of the first segment. Nobody can pass me if I just stay on the bottom. So I started just strategically holding everybody back. Now, remember though, that only works if you don't screw it up. I had the opportunity to have a little bit more fun with David Green, and then I got back up to 3rd after the first pit cycle. On lap 41, Dale Earnhardt Jr. blew up right behind me, which very well could mark the end of his championship run, and then David Green screwed himself. And also, if you couldn't already tell, I kinda suck at knowing when people are pitting up in front of me. So, I got into Jerry Mayfield as he was coming to pit road, and he was very offended about that, but frankly, I don't know what to tell you. I need a better indication that you're pitting than just slowly drifting to the left. I cycled out in 4th after my final pit stop and got myself into a major battle in the closing laps trying to hold off names such as Jeff Gordon, Jimmy Johnson, Elliott Sadler, Kevin Harvick, and Kurt Busch. David Green only helped complicate the situation as I lapped him for the 500th time in this race, and while we were all fighting for position, Jeff Gordon also blew an engine. I let Kevin Harvick go, and I held off everyone else to take a 5th place finish, satisfying my sponsor contracts. And then next up was Talladega, and this time I wasn't going to get myself screwed over by pit strategy. I qualified in 5th, which is just insane speed for my superspeedway qualifying standards. And I hooked up with Kevin Harvick, and we drafted our way past Tony Stewart and Dale Earnhardt Jr. and left everyone in the dust. We had about a 9-second lead above the pack before I went down pit road. After taking rights on my first stop, I cycled out with a gap of 7 seconds above Harvick and 16 seconds above the pack. After making my second pit stop, I had some close calls with drivers who had already ran out of gas. Bobby Labonte brought out the caution when Ryan Newman rammed him at full speed, and I knew, from that point, we're going to have a string of debris cautions. So, I went down pit road, put on 4 tires this time, and I cycled out in 30th. We didn't make it a single lap before Bobby caused a debris caution. I came really close to wrecking when a bunch of cars aborted their attempts to come down pit road. It got close there for a second. I stayed out during the caution, cycled back to the lead, and again, we didn't make it a single lap because Newman's hood flew off. Bobby caused another debris caution, and then brother Terry joined in. We finished the race under yellow, and I was finally on the right end of the strategy and picked up the win in the EA Sports 500. That win, by the way, boosted me up to 6th in points. Next up was Kansas, and just like the similar tracks in Las Vegas and Chicagoland, I'm just a little bit off here. I qualified in the 14th spot, took advantage of some checkups, and actually got up to 7th for just a moment, but then I started fading towards the end of the first stint, but slowed the bleeding by almost destroying Jimmy Johnson. After a whole lot of riding around while slowly losing time to the leader, business picked up at the end of the race. I knew that I wasn't going to make most of my sponsorship objectives, but I had a shot at beating Rusty Wallace. I raced like a madman the final few laps just to keep him behind me, succeeded in doing so, and took home a 13th place finish. Next up was Charlotte, where I really wanted to make it a clean sweep of all 3 races there this season. And my car was so much faster than it was in the spring that I had to change my lift points. I mean, I was hitting 205 by myself. I won the pole by 0.4 of a second, and then just left the whole field in the dust. Literally, no one could challenge me. The only difficult part of the race was making it through the lap traffic, but I was so much in control of the race that even that was pretty easy. On lap 36, I went to lap Mark Martin, and strangely, he made a mistake in the dogleg, slapped the wall, bounced off of me, and almost wrecked it. Meanwhile, it only took me 44 laps to put the entire field a lap down. I continued to flex my pace to the field a few more times, and I brought it home to another dominant Charlotte win. I was the only car to finish on the lead lap, and there was only 2 cars that finished 1 lap down. Consider this race a warning shot to the field for the 2005 season. This marks the halfway point in the 10-race Not a Chase, and the win at Charlotte moved me up to 4th in points, back 732 points from Tony Stewart. And as you know, I hate Martinsville in this game, and it was the next race. So in my qualifying run, I instantly spun out, did a bonus donut, and then I somehow put it on pole. So once we got into the race, I decided I'm going to try to set a record. Least laps ran under green. I made a bunch of enemies in this race, but you know what? It was a good stress reliever. I brought it home in 4th spot while Bill Elliott took the win. Only 31 cars even finished. Atlanta was the next race, and that was pretty good for my rival situation. This track is wide, and you don't need to use the bumper here, so I'm not going to make any of these relationships much worse. I qualified in 2nd, barely missing out on the pole, and tried taking the lead on the start, but just really didn't have the pace to hold off Tony Stewart. I did my job for Ford, though, letting Dale Jarrett take the lead, and I spent the first stint slowly falling backwards, eventually falling back to 11th before my first pit stop. So I then continued to circulate while very little happened. But you know, a quiet race was really what I needed. I barely held off Rusty Wallace for the sponsorship objective, and I finished in the 12th position. Dale Jarrett picked up the win, and by the way, similar to Dirt to Daytona, I had a replay break. At this point, Tony Stewart has already won the Drivers' Championship, but the manufacturer's title is down to just 5 points between Chevrolet and Ford. The next race was Phoenix, which I came into with a lot of confidence, going off my last run at a flat 1-mile track in New Hampshire. I put it on pole and ran the opening lap of the race using the modern configuration. You know, I was pretty fast at Phoenix, but not too fast. Very much a Richmond-style race where I can't just run away with it, which makes execution very critical, and I wasn't planning on throwing this one away. Dale Jr. ran me down, and since we're still rivals from Martinsville, I had to be a little careful. I had an interesting moment on lap 28. David Green got into me because I tried to back up the corner, and at that point I pretty much stopped on entry so that I wouldn't spin out, and Dale Jr. just plowed right into me, and I think it hurt him more than it hurt me. During the second stint, I put a decent gap above the new second-place runner, Tony Stewart. That is until Casey Mears spun out by himself. The entire field pitted during that yellow, and I had another awesome telepathic pit stop from my crew. The only problem? Christian Fittipaldi. He blocked me in from getting out of my pit stall, costing me at least 7 spots. And that forced me to drive like an idiot on the restart. I didn't have the car to go up there and chase them down on the long run, so I had to make my move fast. The battle for the lead came down to me, Dale Jarrett, lap traffic. I threw it into turn number 3, super deep, twice, trying to get the lead off DJ, and it worked the second time, but Dale was very, very disappointed in the way that I went about it. But at least he gave me really great motivation to try to gap everyone as fast as possible. But then, on lap 67, Jarrett came down pit road, and at that point, I started short shifting and working the gap that I held back to Dale Earnhardt Jr. so that I could save a little bit of fuel. Once Jr. got within 1 second of me, I had to start running it hard again. And Jr. tried me a couple times up the outside, but I barely held him off to take the win. And if you want to know how close I was on fuel, watch this burnout. Them laps I backed off were probably the only reason I even got the win. Also, Rusty Wallace and Robbie Gordon figured out how to phase through each other on pit road. By the way, the Manufacturers' Championship is down to just 2 points. Next up was the penultimate race of the year, Rockingham, which is a track that I've really never ran too well at in this career mode, but with how good my equipment has been, I still had some pretty decent confidence. I even surprised myself by qualifying on pole, and I struggled just a little bit at the start of the race until I figured something out. Shifting. I had the fuel economy to do it, and downshifting to 3rd gear fixed my tight on entry problem when I timed it right. It also helped my speed on the exit of the corners. again, I'm driving the world's first next-gen car. The moment I started downshifting was the moment I started dominating this race. I had some small run-ins with Craven and Kenseth just because I wasn't going to get trapped behind any lap cars, but beyond that, basically nothing happened, and I picked up my first career Rockingham race win. You know, this is one of my all-time favorite tracks, so I did put a lot of emphasis on winning here eventually. I just didn't expect it to happen in Season 2. That win put Ford in the lead for the Manufacturers' Championship standings by just 1 point above Chevrolet. And fittingly, we're coming into the final race of the season, the Ford 400 from Homestead Miami Speedway. I knew that with how fast Stewart and Jr. are, it's pretty much up to me to go secure this Manufacturers' Championship for Ford. Now, there was a long shot that Dale Jarrett might be able to go up there and win this race, but I couldn't rely on him. I actually ran this race with the car that I was saving for Season 3's Daytona 500. It's got a car rating of 75, and I decided to run it so that I had the best possible chance of beating the Chevys of Tony Stewart and Dale Jr. I put it on the pole by almost half a second, my 19th and final pole of 2004. And let me tell you, I love this racetrack. It's literally the only track in this game that you can run from the bottom to the top. Everywhere else in this game, it's just bottom feeding. But here, you take your pick. Personally, I love running up by the fence. Running up there, I find, lets me run the car a little looser than I'd be able to on the bottom, and that translates pretty well to speed. So I set sail and gapped the field by a few seconds until I started burning up the right rear tire just because I was admittedly running it a little too hard. So Tony Stewart caught up to me and we got into an intense battle for the lead. There was a little bit of contact, albeit accidental, and then I ducked down pit road on lap 23. Because I had short pitted by a lot, I cycled out with an 8-second advantage. I did not abuse my tires on this run either because I wasn't being pressured from behind. Then my pit crew absolutely nailed the final stop of the season, and I cycled back to the point. In the end, sure, Tony Stewart won the championship by over 500 points, but I picked up my 13th win of the season at Homestead Miami and secured the Manufacturers' Championship for Ford in the Ford 400. That's 3 wins in a row to close out 2004, and I think I've positioned myself for a really good run at the championship next season. You know, let's look at some postseason stuff. So, Tony Stewart won the championship by 516 points, to be exact. In 36 starts, he had 34 top 10s. Absolutely unreal. Dale Jr. finished second in points, Dale Jarrett third, and I closed out 4th position in the point standings. I won 19 poles, 13 races, and I also earned $6.15 million, which is the most money earned by any single driver. I also had the highest top speed, 211.449 miles an hour, which I hit at Pocono, thanks to the experimental Ford Cosworth engine program. Ford won the Manufacturers' Championship by 4 points, and I was the lap champion with almost 300 more laps led than anyone else. And guess what? Bill Elliott retired after 2004 with no replacement. So Evernham downsizes to a 1-car team with Jeremy Mayfield. They're going to struggle next season. Bill picked up his final win in that stupid Martinsville race where I wrecked everyone and then he decided to just call it. How poetic. I also signed new builders and new pit crew members in the offseason to the team. So the 2005 championship attempt dream team has been officially assembled. Season 3 is going to be a big one. Now, I want to take just a moment and thank each and every one of my channel supporters. Your support is incredibly appreciated, and I also want to thank everyone for their patience. Believe me, even I'm frustrated how long these videos are taking to make. That being said, the next video will be Season 3 of this career mode. I don't want to break up the momentum that I've got going right now, and my personal goal is to start getting videos out in a much timelier fashion. You viewers deserve it. But you know, learning how to be competitive in this career mode was certainly an experience, and I think that going after that Manufacturers' Championship gave me good practice for a Drivers' Championship run next season. Anyways, I had a great time making this video, and I really hope you enjoyed watching it. Season 3 is coming up soon. I've got quite a bit of new content planned right after that. So as always, I'll see you next time.